and it is my pleasure to welcome our guests here in the Black Box Theater and virtually on Zoom to this special edition of the Diane Rehm Book Club. WAMU's mission is to connect our community with each other and the world. Tonight's book club is just one of the opportunities we provide to explore curiosity and relationships. We are so pleased tonight to introduce and invite Sheila Johnson to the book club stage to talk about her memoir, Walk Through Fire. We will be taking questions from the audience tonight. If you are here in the Black Box Theater, a member of the WAMU team will be circulating with a microphone. If you are joining us on Zoom, please use the Q&A on the center of your Zoom screen at the bottom to submit your questions. Also, if you are joining us on Zoom, you can access closed captioning by hitting the CC button. Tonight, this program, as everything we do at WAMU, would not be possible without you and your very generous support of the station. We are so grateful. Thank you. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our host, Diane Rehm, and our guest, Sheila Johnson.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Okay, and this is Bella. She is a very friendly puppy, so she may come visit you during the program. Just don't feed her. I have to tell you, Sheila, we are so honored to have you here.
Thank you.
I have both read and listened to this book. And I have to tell you that if you have any young women that you know, every young woman I know should be given a copy of this book, no matter what age you are. But the reason I say that is not just because it tells the story of an absolutely remarkable life, but such an unusual one, which started, I think, Sheila, with your mother
Yes.
crying in the kitchen
Yes.
and your brother hollering to you for you to help. What was happening?
What was happening is my father suddenly decided to leave us. And it was a case where he was one of 8 African American neurosurgeons in the country. And, we had a status in the community. And back then, in the 50s, late 50s, things were different.
Yeah.
And it was a case where my mother's whole being was with him. And when he decided to just leave us, and it was a cold leave, he just decided he was going. She had a nervous breakdown. And at 16 years old, I suddenly had to grow up. I had to be in charge of the family. I didn't know what to do. I took a job at J.C. Penney's. I was scrubbing floors. I was doing whatever they needed. And I remember coming in from work, and she was on the floor having convulsions and just screaming. And my brother didn't know what to do. He was younger than me. And so I finally had to call an ambulance and found out that I was going to get charged for that ambulance. I didn't have a penny on me. The other thing was, so I called my Aunt Mercedes. She wasn't a real aunt. She was a good friend, but I called her Aunt Mercedes. And she says, let's get her to the hospital. I will take care of the bill. But that was a turning point in my life where I really realized that women had no rights. Now, this was before Ruth Bader Ginsburg and He just up and left. He would not pay child support. She did not have credit cards. She did not have a bank account. She couldn't get it without his authorization. And fast forward, when I went through a divorce, I had the same problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I must say, the other point about your childhood, which shocked me so, was that you moved 10 times.
13.
13
13
times.
times.
In how many years?
Oh, it was every 10 months. Because he was not allowed to practice
Because?
on white patients. He could only operate on African American patients. And he was connected with the VA, and once he would finish that slot, then we were moved again. So that was the problem. And people say, that's really tough on you. Actually, it was quite an adventure, and it built resiliency
Absolutely.
in me. So I never looked at it as a negative. I'm like, where are we going next? And it was just amazing. We were up and down the East Coast and into Pennsylvania, and then finally settled just outside of Chicago in Maywood, Illinois, and where he became chief of staff at Hines VA Hospital. But that's when...
Where he met another woman.
Yeah, I call her the bedpan nurse, yes.
The bedpan nurse. I blame you not. I
Yes.
blame you not.
I think she
Let's
was.
face it, there are a lot of wonderful nurses out there who do a great many good things for so many people, but in that case, it was one nurse.
Gold digger. Yeah.
So, in fact, you had taken up the violin.
Yeah, no, this is really important. And I want
Very.
you, when you read this book and understand my life, I really had 3 acts in life. Once, I had already started playing the violin at age
Yes.
9. But when that happened, I really immersed myself into the violin. That was my safety net, was music. And I would get up after doing my homework and doing everything else that I needed to do, cook dinner. I mean, I literally had to grow up fast. I would go to bed for about 2 hours and wake up at midnight, and that's when I would practice my violin.
And you do it downstairs.
Downstairs
so they
in the
wouldn't
kitchen
hear
because I
you.
love the acoustics and no one else could hear me. But that was my safety net. There was something about that instrument that brought me solace, and it was my escape because when I would rehearse with the orchestra or played with the string quartet, that's where my identity was.
I must say, there was one very generous thing
Yes.
that your both parents did, and that was
They mortgaged the house for
to
me to
buy
get this
you.
violin. Yes, to buy this violin. And it meant everything to me. And you will read in the book, I made a great sacrifice into my second act in life to help my then husband, because we needed office space for Black Entertainment Television. It was the birth of cable. I don't know, I'm kind of skipping around here, but is that all right?
Here's where I want to back you
Okay.
up a little bit, if I may.
Okay.
And this is the lesson that young women should keep in mind.
Yes.
You met Bob Johnson. You had gotten a scholarship
Yes.
because of your wonderful friend.
Yeah, she was my orchestra director.
She
Yeah.
was your orchestra director. You got this wonderful scholarship to the University of Illinois.
Yes,
And shortly thereafter,
I met him. Yes.
you met Bob Johnson. And tell us how he approached you.
I was selected as a freshman to go to this 2-week prep camp because the University of Illinois is huge, as we all know. And it was a case where an upperclassman got paired with a freshman, and he was paired with me. And from that moment on, it was almost like, I'm not going to call it an obsession, but he was literally glued to me.
Exactly.
You know? And my mother, Susan Sterrett, everyone says red flags.
Red flags.
They could tell immediately that something was not right.
Well, when you say in the book that he put his fist through the wall.
Right.
Why?
Because I just said, I started to listen to them, and I was saying, I do want to date other people.
Yeah.
And he would not take no for an answer and got very angry and put his fist right through the wall. And it scared me.
On the other hand,
yes,
you thought, oh,
well, he really wants me, you know. Now, you have to understand there's a lot of underlying psychological reasons for all these things happening. It was because my father left. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be needed and wanted. And a lot of women go through this. You know, I was listening to the news this morning about women who go on the dating apps, you know, because they're so lonely and they want to do that. I could empathize with them, you know. It's one of those things where I'm like, someone has really loved me for the first time in my life, because I thought my father stopped loving me. Because from the moment he left, he never wanted to have anything to do with his children. I never, ever saw him again. Except one time. And that was in the hospital when I went to visit his brother, Uncle Joe, whom I adored, had stomach cancer. And I was in there with Uncle Joe, and then my father walks in, and he asked me, what am I doing there? There's a lot of things in the book where I lost trust in him. He didn't want to have anything to do with me. So what was happening when Bob came along, I felt needed for the first time.
And
I felt loved.
Yeah.
But that wasn't love.
It was control.
It was control. It was a narcissistic control.
So he goes off in the middle of your junior year to Princeton,
right,
to get his PhD.
No, it's a master's. Yeah.
And he wanted
me to leave the University of Illinois. I was in my junior year, and I said, I can't do that. I'm on scholarship.
Right.
So he left Princeton and came back and started working with a program called Project 500, because Illinois was trying to recruit African American students to that school, because it was less than 1% there. So he did come back and do that. But what had happened, once I finished up my senior year, he would not let me go through graduation. It devastated my parents.
Of course.
My mother. My father didn't know what I was doing.
He said, you finish your last exam and we're
leaving and going to Princeton. I said, but what are we going to be doing there? He says, well, we're going. And so I never went through physically my graduation. And many years later, I finally went back and then delivered the commencement address. You know, things do work out.
But tell me...
there's just lessons learned in life.
Along the way, he did ask you to marry him.
Oh, I got married in my junior year.
Exactly. Yeah. And your wedding night.
He left me. Yes.
I mean, I heard somebody say, what? That's how I felt reading and listening.
Yeah.
He left you
He
in
just
this
never returned.
motel.
We were in this seedy little motel. And I remember my mother coming. She says, you know, we have time to get out of this. And I said, but Mom, I love him. You know, she goes, you're crazy. She says, you're absolutely crazy.
So did you wait for him?
I waited. I can't remember after that what I did, but he eventually showed up. I honestly do not remember. You have to understand, when you write a book like this, I had help by a woman, Lisa Dickey. I swear she could be a therapist. But she could find things from just little notes that I've written.
Yeah.
Anything. She says, Sheila, you have a lot of information here. And she was dissecting my brain as to why I was doing this, why I was doing that. So we would write. And then I'd start to shake. And she says, you're still suffering from post-traumatic stress.
Absolutely.
I had to go through a lot of therapy. I was severely depressed. And I remember my daughter saying, Mom, you've been depressed most of my life. And I felt so guilty.
These children, these wonderful children,
Yeah.
you adopted
I adopted both my kids, yes.
after you had a miscarriage.
Yeah, what had happened, I had adopted my daughter, Paige, and then suddenly I got pregnant a few years later.
Yeah.
And I remember being at the National Child Research Center, very pregnant. I was in her classroom, and I started going into labor. And I went to, where was I? I think I was at,
You went?
I was at GW.
Ah.
I had to go to GW. And they said, something's wrong. Something's really wrong. And it was a case where he had a diaphragmatic hernia.
No.
That, all of his intestines had gone up into his, now they can operate on it, and fix it. But yeah, I lost that child 1 hour after he was born.
But those two children,
They're wonderful.
they are so wonderful.
They're terrific. I really, as depressed as I was, I made sure I spent quality time with them and worked with them. I mean, my son is a wonderful menswear designer. He's in Saks here in Chevy Chase and in Chicago. He'll be at Harrods in October. My daughter would have made the U.S. Olympic team. She was on the Nations Cup team, yeah. And she's just an incredible equestrian. Yeah,
Isn't
they're
it
really
wonderful?
and I have 4 grandchildren now.
So the question becomes along the way, because, I mean, I could have Sheila sitting here for 3 hours to tell you this whole story, which is why, as a gift, as you leave, you will receive a copy of her signed book. The point being that there were times when I was hollering, saying, Sheila, get the hell out.
I know. Well, again, as time goes on, back in those days, you never left.
Exactly.
And I was torn between whether I should stay or leave. I was going to feel like a failure. And I would go to, I thought, so-called friends, and I would explain to them that I needed to get out of this marriage. No, you can't get out. You and Bob are the king and the queen of media, of black media. No, men do this, just turn the cheek, that kind of thing. I said it's more than just philandering.
Yeah.
This was narcissistic abuse. I was being emotionally abused
Absolutely.
to the highest level, to the point that I remember when I was in Treetop Toys, and I just completely fell apart. And I remember the woman in there saying, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I was." But I just almost had a breakdown.
Give us, if you would, I mean, I can remember at least 2, 3 times when, for example, you work so hard to make BET a reality. And he was taking all the credit.
And I let him take all the credit because that's what wives do, you see. But when that happens, he should have shown me respect too and could have turned the table around and said, and I couldn't have done it without you.
He could have said that.
I mean, I
and
ended
never
up
did.
selling my violin, which I could not tell my mother, to help pay the rent for our first for our first office space. There were sacrifices that I made, And I consciously made these sacrifices because I wanted him to look good. And I really believed in the whole idea of black entertainment television because that was the birth of all of cable. And no one had paid attention to the African American voice. And when we took the proposal to John Malone out in Denver, he says, "This is the best idea I've ever seen." And he immediately wrote a $500,000 check. Now,
Wow.
you know in media, it goes just like that. So anyway, there was other ways we had to find money, and one was to sell my violin so that we could pay the rent on the American Trial Lawyers building, which was our first assignment there. And it was just a case that I wanted to do whatever I could. And it was very tough in the beginning because advertisers did not want to invest in a black-owned network. Even hair straightening companies would not do it. Our first advertiser was McDonald's. They finally came in because, see, advertising is what pays the bills.
Of course.
Here at public television, you have
Or
donors.
public radio.
Yes, I mean, that's how you keep things on the air. And this was the reality of the situation. So as BET started to grow, and we had some ridiculous programming in the very beginning. I just remember we had this ex-convict, Petey Green, and he was on showing us how to eat pork chops and chitlins or something like that. I'm like, why do we have something on like that? I mean, we were scrambling for anything. So after a while, the gift that was given to us is that MTV would not show black videos. So they came to BET.
Wow.
So that's how this whole video phase, and it's still going on.
Still going on.
Still going on. The first 9 months of these videos airing, I said, this is the greatest idea. It was Michael Jackson and one of the Beatles guys, McCarthy.
Yeah.
Just wonderful ideas of, the art of storytelling through music. And I said, this was really nice. But about 8 to 9 months later, what happened? When you watch those videos, the way they were showing young women gyrating and moving around in this video, I just couldn't take it anymore. I really couldn't take it because if you turn the volume down, to me it looked like pornography.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was these young girls, I thought, being exploited through the video market. Now, these young kids are saying, oh, you're crazy, you're old-fashioned, whatever.
And that's what Bob would say to you.
Yes. It's edutainment. That's the word he would use. I said, no, it's not. So what I decided to do was to start a show called Teen Summit. And it was about smart TV watching. I wanted to get to the heart of these young men and women and say, look, we can do better programming here. I chose 25 exceptional young people from around the DMV. We would meet Friday after school and put a whole show together. And we shot live the next day at 12 o'clock. It was called Teen Summit. I had a stage made. We were on the rooftop of an apartment building, and I had the little fly girls dancing. But it was a magazine format show where we really talked about issues. Now, this captured the attention of the Clinton administration and Brookings Institute because we had a teen pregnancy rate that was out of control across the country. And so I was working with Sarah Brown at Brookings, and we decided that we were going to use Teen Summit as the platform to really talk to these young people about how they live their lives, about parenting, just all sorts of subjects that they would not talk to their parents about. This really, really worked. This show won awards for 11 years. It won the ACE Awards and finally was nominated for Emmys, but it worked. And I remember taking the show on the road to Houston. I remember coming out on the stage to welcome there was hundreds of kids out there, and they gave us a standing ovation.
Yeah.
And I remember some girls were just crying. They said, "Thank you for talking with us." See, these young people really need communication.
Absolutely.
They need leadership. They need someone to help them make decisions.
I want to take you back a little bit because there are a couple of things that people may not know about. Number one, your extraordinary success at teaching music at Sidwell Friends School here in D.C., and then going off on your own, establishing a young person's orchestra, performing, and unbeknownst to you, Queen Noor was in the audience.
Yeah.
And she came up to you and invited you to come to the embassy.
Yes. This was really remarkable. So this is when, before it was Trump Waldorf, whatever this hotel is. We were performing, and I had this orchestra on stage. They were just an extraordinary orchestra, just incredible talent. I had taught every one of the students. And all of a sudden, this delegation came in. I didn't know who they were, but it was the Jordanians. And Dr. Mazin Armouti, see, I remember his name. Thank God. He asked me to come off the stage, and he says, "Her Majesty wishes to speak with the children." So I had them all stay in place, and she went around, and she shook every one of their hands and talked to them. In the meantime, he was talking to me. He says, "Can you come tomorrow night to the Jordanian embassy? We'd like to meet with you." What happened is she was so enthralled with the group.
She's a lovely lady.
That we were invited to the Jerash Festival, which is the oldest cultural festival in the Middle East. It had been unearthed. It was in an earthquake hundreds of years ago or something. And they were able to dig it out. But just an extraordinary piece of history there. And so we were the only children invited to this cultural festival. I mean, they had the Bolshoi Ballet, they had everybody there, and we were the last ones to be paraded in. It was like the Olympics. And it was such an honor to have the kids perform there, and we performed at the foot of the Temple of Artemis. And it was memorable.
And you were invited back.
Many times Queen Noor asked us to come back. I remember we played for Mrs. Sadat. We played for several occasions over there. I mean, we were her.
I mean, what you need to know about this woman is that she is not only an enormously gifted violinist, but she has taught so many children music.
Especially here in this area.
In
I
this
still run
area.
into them. They have jobs. They're writers. They're
Wonderful?
journalists. I got interviewed by the Washingtonian magazine, and Robbie came to me. He says, "You don't remember me?" He has a beard, and I didn't, And he pulls out, he started asking me questions about my basement on Brandywine Street. And I said, "How do you know about that?" And then he pulls pictures out of me teaching him. Because his mother was always taking pictures at the lessons. So it was really great. So many of these students are all grown up with their own families now, and it's great to be reacquainted with them. But that was a very special time, and I got honored by the King and the Queen with the highest honor in education called Al Nada.
And then BET was going on to the New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, yes. We were the first African American company on the New York Stock Exchange. I was very excited about it, and I couldn't wait to get to Wall Street.
Right.
And my ex would not let me go. I was denied that.
You were still married to him.
I was still married and still working there.
Yeah.
And he would not let me go.
And you were all dressed and ready to go.
He just would not let me go. I think he had his girlfriend or somebody with him. I don't know. But
he did not want to share the credit with you. And he did the same thing to you on a night you were due at the White House.
That's right. I was all dressed and ready to go. And I couldn't figure out why he hadn't shown up to get into his tux. 20 minutes before we were to leave, he came in and looked at me up and down. He says, I'm not going with you dressed like that. So this is the kind of abuse that a lot of women go through. And I'm finding this out as I've been signing books and women coming to me in tears. And saying, you know, I wish I had read this book earlier. I'm giving it to my daughter. There are so many red flags out there that women get involved in.
How did you finally have
the nerve to leave?
Yeah.
It was the last affair. And it was, he had had many before that. But this one killed me because I had hired this woman. She was an attorney, and I had a feeling things were going on because I would listen to the secretary how they were booking connecting rooms. And then she kept escalating quickly in the company, doing nothing. But I knew what she was doing then.
Yeah, of course.
Rising horizontally. Anyway, it just killed me.
Of course.
Because our kids were in the same school. The school was calling me, saying, what in the H is going on here? I mean, it just was rampant all over the city. Everybody knew what was going on, and I kept denying it. I'm like, how could she do this to me? But she eventually became president and CEO of BET. And then had nerve to write a book that she was being violent. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, yes, that's what happened. And that's when I snapped. That's when I said, you know what? I now understand what is happening here. And it wasn't just me as the victim, but there were the other executives that became the victim of this. I mean, they were fired from the company. I got fired from the company. And I said, you can't fire me. We started this company together. And you have to understand, I'm not going anywhere. He says, I want you out of here. I'm going to move you out of here on a Sunday. He says, I don't want anyone around, but you're out of here. I said, well, you're going to sell the company. And that's when I found my lawyer. And we started. And I remember being in New York, and I saw the ticker tape going around at Times Square. The BET had been sold for $3 billion. I'm like, perfect. This is great. So I had my ducks in a row, and I had been saving. I mean, I had all of the ammunition there. I had been building up for 2 years. I knew something was going on. But I kept receipts. I kept everything.
For you.
Because
good for you.
If this was going to go sideways, I was ready. For some reason, I really snapped, and I said, that's it. I'm out of here. And that's when I filed for divorce.
And you got half.
I got a little more than half.
I'm glad of that. I'm glad of that.
Yeah.
So we now move on to the third part.
Third act of my life. Now, this is a whole nother story.
Is falling in love with the area around Middleburg.
Right.
What happened? I mean, did you just sort of look at it and think, this is what I want to look at every day of my life?
Well, yes, I had known the area because my daughter was competing out there a lot. She was on ponies, and I had just fallen in love with the stone walls. And anyway, there was one farm that I kept passing, going to Warrenton. And it said Cotswold on it or something like that. Finally, I had the nerve, once I knew I was leaving Washington, D.C., I called a real estate agent and I said, there's a farm that I really want to know. Is it possible that I can buy it? And the woman came and she says, well, it's not for sale. I said, anything's for sale. So anyway, she got in touch with a Bill Ildesacker, who started Polo down in Wellington. And he says, he'd only been there 4 months. He says, yeah, I'll sell it. He says, but I don't want to keep the name of the farm. I said, you can have the name of the farm. So anyway, I said, who owned it before Bill Ildesacker? And it was a man by the name of Bruce Sunland. Bruce Sunland was a fighter pilot who had been shot down over Nazi-occupied Germany. He was able to escape, but his entire unit was captured into a POW camp. He was able to go across Europe on bicycles. The Nazis had license plates on all these bicycles, and that's how they could track people. He ended up in Allied territory of France. The United States came to him and said, look, we've got to go back, and we've got to get your unit out of this POW camp, and we're going to give you the code name Salamander. And he says, well, that's great, but what does it mean? He says, well, mythically, it's the only animal that can walk through fire and still come out alive.
And that is the title of Sheila's book.
But if you cut off its limbs, they do regenerate. And when he told me the story, now it's a true story because Hogan's Heroes is about Bruce Sunland, that show. I said, I have got to have that. He says, I don't know what you want to do with it, but it's all yours. And it's funny because I ran into his son at a Mets game in New York, and he says, I love what you've done with my dads.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
But you ran into a lot of resistance from the locals, including Robert Duvall.
That's true.
Who owns a big piece of property.
I, again, didn't see red flags.
Yeah.
I thought that the world was getting rosy again after getting out of a bad marriage.
Yeah.
Anything was better. And I remember moving to this wonderful farm, and every time I drive into the town of Middleburg, there was a gun shop on the right-hand side called the Powderhorn. And it had a Confederate flag in the window. And it just, every time I got angrier and angrier. I said, this is not what I signed up for. So I called my attorney. I said, there's a building that's going to be for sale. And I told him where it was. He says, why do you want to buy it? I said, because I can. And I have a better idea of what this building could be used for. So I turned it into a wonderful market. I bought the building, got the flag out of there, and
got those guns out there, too.
Oh, I moved him out. Yeah. So that worked out great. But then I was still trying to figure out what Act 3 was going to be. And so a man came to me, he was a broker, and he says, look, Pamela Harriman's property's up for sale. There's 340 acres. I said, is there a house on it? He says, no. He says, that's further back. I said, because I don't need another house.
Yeah, right.
He says, but it's 340 acres, and it borders the town and beyond Middleburg. So I went up there and stood up there, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. It started out to be an inn. What had happened, the town was totally bankrupt, and it needed, I knew, an economic engine that was going to bring the town alive again, and it would bring business back there. Their water sewage treatment plant had failed. Everything had gone wrong. So I decided that I was going to build an inn, and then with smarter minds said, you're not going to make money on an inn. So I ended up doing a design with WATG out of Newport Beach, California, and it became a resort. And I thought that it's the best idea. Well, let me tell you what happened. It's called the Piedmont Environmental Council. They came after me. It was a 10-year fight.
10 years.
It turned into a racial fight, a hate fight. The FBI came in. because there was interstate mail fraud going on. My life was threatened.
Wow.
My kids' lives were threatened.
Wow.
It was an ugly, ugly fight, and it went on. I went through hearings in Loudoun County. They were very good. It's when it came down to the town
Of Middleburg.
they came after me. I don't want you to destroy my way of life.
How much do you think was racism?
Oh, it was in my face. They called me a black bee, and it was really ugly. It was really ugly. And
I don't know how you had the strength to withstand that.
well, I think it's because I got out of Act Two, and that kind of built up my resilience.
Yeah.
In Act Three, no, I had invested so much money in doing design work and just getting this off the ground that I would have not been able to live with myself if I had backed out. And in the end, do you know I won by one vote?
What?
One vote.
You were there.
I mean, it was tight.
And boy, I mean, everybody was by that point.
Yeah.
A lot of people rooting for you.
Yeah.
But still,
and there's still a group of people.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still have issues with them.
Yeah.
That want to stop me. They, for whatever their reasons are. But I will tell you now, that town is probably one of the wealthiest historic towns in the state of Virginia. They are doing so well. They're booming. It's wonderful. There's all sorts of things that we brought there. I have a film festival there. I do something called the Family Reunion, where I bring 41 of the top chefs from all across the country. It's a food and wine event.
Robert Redford came.
Oh, yeah.
And he wanted you
to do the film festival.
Festival.
He's the one that planted that idea in my head. I took him up there because he was interested in, he didn't know quite what he was going to do with the Sundance
He's
Preserve.
sort of thinking, even now, about what he's going to do with that Sundance.
I know.
Is he...
He hasn't come back to me. I don't know whether it's his son, but you think it's still up in the air? Maybe I'll have to give him a call.
I do. I think it's up in the air. You know, there are so many people who have come here to see you, meet you. There may be a few questions
Certainly.
here in the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we'll bring a microphone to you. There is a question right there, and there's Igor with the microphone.
It's wonderful to be here with both of you. You're both
Thank
legends. I read your book, and I was amazed at all the accomplishments you made. And despite being in that emotionally abusive relationship, you were creating businesses and organizations, and you were a consummate creator. How did you, and you came to a point where you realized, I think, your greatness and your worth, and you said, I'm not going to stay in this marriage. What mantra maybe do you still have to reconcile those two? Because you're a phenomenally accomplished woman, but I'm sure sometimes those thoughts haunt you. What do you tell yourself?
Oh, those thoughts still haunt me. And I would say until just before the book came out, I still had nightmares. It was a lot of post-traumatic stress that came out of this. But it was my mother.
Mm.
You know, it's really interesting how things come full circle. Here I was there for her at age 16, and I moved her from the Chicago area to my farm because I wanted to take care of her, and I needed her. And she kept saying, Sheila, I really know who you are. You've made mistakes, but I will never leave your side. And she says, more than anything, and she had this cane, and she says, it's time for you to get your power back. And she says, I mean it. She says, don't come, and I would have lunch with her every day. And she says, don't you come up here playing the victim at all. She says, "You're stronger than that." And what she really wanted to live for was to see the doors of that resort open, because she lived through the agonizing hearings that I had been going through. It just broke her heart that people would talk to me that way and treat me that way. And she lived long enough. When those doors opened up, I remember bringing her through in a wheelchair. That was August 29th, 2013, and she died 4 months later.
I'm so glad
But
she lived.
there's
to
something,
see it.
and I'll read this to you, that's at the end of the book in the epilogue that is, I like to read this. It says, "If I could go back in time and talk to my younger self, I would tell her this: trust your instincts. Get to know who you are before you give yourself to someone else. Believe that you can find happiness and that you deserve it. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay."
I think that was so wonderful that you had her. We have a question from Alice. In the book, you talk about how you did not always feel part of the Black community when you were young. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, this was a period where it was the Black Power movement. You know, I'm too fair, and I wasn't dark enough. So I've always floated in between. I was called Hayella. I mean, there was, and because I played the violin, I wasn't like anyone else.
Yeah.
So I was like a little weird to them. I didn't think I was that weird, but they thought I was weird, and I just couldn't seem to fit in. And what exacerbated it even more was when we moved to Washington, D.C., and there's the Gold Coast, the Platinum Coast. There are these
16th
cliques
Street. Yeah.
of communities. No one wanted us in there. And it was a case where it was very hard to make friends. This is a tough city. It's a very tough
You
city.
bet.
And unless you have money, unless you are a politician or something, you're not going to fit in. If you're just a regular person that's just moved here, it is hard. It is very hard. And no one, I was probably the loneliest person in the city, you know, and what happened, especially in Act 1 of my life, teaching at Sidwell, that's when I started making friends. And it was through the parents and the children that I taught, where I felt more at home.
They believed in you.
They believed in me.
Yeah.
The arts were really my foundation in life, and still are. I mean, I use it through my hotel company, by just what I was telling you. I brought the American Ballet Theater onto the Grand Lawn, came in buses and set up a stage. I love giving my guests those experiences through the arts. All of the artwork that's in that resort is special art that I've curated. And through all of our hotels, it's not just that one now. We're up to 6 hotels.
Wow.
And we're going after, hopefully, another one.
Good.
That we're working on
Good.
now.
Excellent. Another question. Did you ever replace your expensive violin?
Yes, I had a
Good.
Grafillo, but now this is a Loeffler. It's not as good as the other one. I just couldn't find one.
And they'd like to know, do you still play?
I still play.
Oh, how
I do not
wonderful.
practice as much as I used to, and I took up the cello during COVID. Yes.
We have to talk about how you met your wonderful
Oh, yes.
husband, Bill.
Well, this is another case where I was teaching at Sidwell, dear Sidwell. I wasn't making enough money. I was only making $7,200 a year. Isn't that something?
Yeah,
And I needed extra income.
of course.
So there was the West End Theater Club. They were doing a show that had come in, the Negro Ensemble Company. It's called Ceremonies and Dark Old Men. And they had an open audition. I went down and audition. It was a part of a prostitute. My name was Candy. And I got the part. It was a funny part, believe me. If it was bad, my mother would have never let me do it. And it was just a great part. And it was 20 minutes on stage, and I made 4 times the amount of money a week than I would have gotten at Sidwell. And so it went on for 98 performances. We finally begged it to be closed down. It was sold out all the time.
Yeah.
And according to Actors Equity and Union, you have to have some local talent. So there was another young man who was brought in, and he had been acting anyway. He had been doing some stuff. He was on soap operas and everything. He was the real deal. So he was acting, and he played the part of Theo. And I was Candy. His father was the one I was trying to get this recipe to make bootleg whiskey. Anyway, that's a long story if you know that. So anyway, fast forward, we went 98 performances, and then that was it. So I went to go get my divorce, and I walked into the courtroom.
But you forgot to mention that Bill was one of the...
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
anyway, we can't spoil the surprise here. So I walk into the courtroom, and I look at the judge, and I look at my lawyer. I said, I think I know this guy. And he goes, no, don't
No.
say that. He says, we're
No.
going to get through this divorce. And so then anyway, we go through the 20 minutes of doing it because the ex never showed up and his lawyer never showed up. This was an easy divorce. So then anyway, once we were done, he says, now you can go talk to him. So I said, Your Honor, may I approach the bench? And he says, yes, you may. I said, by any chance, do you remember me? And he kept looking down at the papers. He said, oh, yes. And I said, well, it's so good to see you. And then I asked him, I said, are you married? Do you have a family? And he said, no, I've never been married. And he says, you know, my mother's still alive and blah, 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 blah. So 3 weeks later, I was president of the Washington International Horse Show. And I sent him an invitation because I was having a gala on the upper level for the Grand Prix night. And I said, to the Honorable William T. and guest. And his mother said, you're not taking anybody. She says, because I remember how you felt about her. He says, but Mom, she was married at the time. She says, I don't care, but you're not taking anybody. He says, you know this time. So he did show up. And 2 weeks later, he asked me out. And we went to the theater, took me to dinner in the theater. And 3 years later, we got married.
Before 700 people.
That's right. We had the biggest, most wonderful, most beautiful
Certainly
wedding,
did.
and we deserved it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Are there other questions here in the audience? We have a microphone right here.
Oh, there's one back there.
Oh, one in the back, and then we'll come to you.
The host of this podcast is my older sister.
Oh.
That's Kojo.
Oh!
That's Kojo.
Hi there. I remember being on your show after I bought the teams.
Exactly, the mystic.
And I will never forget it. You're in the book.
As a matter of fact, I was reading this book many months ago and was shocked when I came up on my own name.
Yes.
But I want to tell a brief story about 2012, when
Okay.
WAMU was collaborating with the Lean and Hungry Theater for a production of The Tempest at Artisphere
Yes.
Theater. And I was moderating the discussion that followed it. And I looked up into the audience, and I knew that that was Sheila Johnson sitting in that audience and couldn't figure out why she was there. So when we got to the question and answer period afterwards, I asked her if that was in fact her sitting there and why she was there. And that's when she pointed out that the aforementioned Judge Newman was performing as Prospero in
Yes.
the play that night because he had returned his acting roots. the roots
Yes,
through which she had first met him
that's
many,
right.
many years ago. So congratulations and thank you
Thank
very
you.
much
And
for
he's
being
still
here.
acting.
Good for
And
him.
he's
Yes,
still
he did
acting.
August Wilson's How I Learned What I Learned,
Oh, how
Good for
all
him.
by
wonderful.
himself.
I'm about to
It's a
turn it back to
one-man
my
show.
older sister.
Well, thank you.
Well, Kojo, thank you so much for that question and for being here tonight.
Hi, Sheila and
Hi.
Diane. I have loved watching your daughter ride over the years
Oh.
Oh.
and have loved visiting Salamander as
Well,
well.
thank you.
This means a lot to me. I also just started my violin journey about a year ago. I would love to know your favorite piece to play and if you're still taking students.
No, I'm not taking students. I do want to start my grandchildren, though. I think it's more Bach. I love playing Bach. It's very rhythmical. That's my favorite. And even when I was doing the cello, I did the Bach unaccompanied. Yeah.
How
so it's great.
difficult was it to switch from the violin
hard at
to
all.
the cello?
Not hard
Really?
at all. Well, at University of Illinois, first of all, I had to learn how to play every instrument in the orchestra because I was conducting too.
Wow.
And so I had some basic foundation there. And during COVID, I found this wonderful cellist who came to the house once a week, and he gave me lessons. He was great.
Wonderful.
In fact, I did a little show on ABC where he and I were playing duets. Yeah.
Other questions here? Yes, right up here.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, and I just want to say what an honor it is to be in your presence.
Thank you.
This is a really special moment for me. So I had a question about your philosophy on passions. And I was so struck how you have had so many passions in your life, especially when you were young in the violin, and how that really propelled you forward. And then teaching, and then BET, and kids, and many of the things you haven't even mentioned here tonight. And do you feel that those passions have really kept you afloat during difficult times?
Yes.
And how do you identify those passions, follow the passions, and do you give it a lot of thought, or do you say, this is what I'm passionate about, I'm going to do it? Because you've been so diverse in all the things you've done. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to how to choose your passions, how to find them, and how to nurture them.
You know, that's a very, very good question. The violin was something that I'm not going to say pushed into, but it was a requirement when I moved to Illinois. The children had to pick up an instrument. They didn't care whether it was a triangle or what. And I chose the violin. And immediately, the passion to want to play that instrument was just holding it. I remembered the smell of the case. It was just something about it that I knew that was going to be it. With BET, it was an opportunity to make changes in communities. And I just knew, and I wouldn't call it a passion. It was just something that I knew I could make a difference because of what had been going on. I mean, it was the end of the Black Power movement, and it was just a case that no one was doing anything except for John Johnson in print media. And it was just an opportunity. It was like a big door that opened. And I said, I know we can make changes. And I'm not sure whether it was an opportunity, but then it became a passion. And I still think that BET could make a difference if it's in the right hands. I believe that media is changing, is going through a real metamorphosis.
Yes.
But BET is up for sale, and I wish someone could get their hands on it and really do a feasibility study on where the minds of the Black community are right now. Kojo, you could do this. And really reevaluate the trajectory in which BET could resurrect itself and make a meaningful difference. Now, when I got into the hospitality industry, it was just a case for the third act of my life. That has become a passion. because even when I was performing all over the world, and I remember being in Salzburg, Austria, and then I went to Gstaad, I was with Isaac Stern, and I'm like, these hotels were so grand and so beautiful, and that had stayed with me. And I wanted to build something like that in Middleburg, but it had to still look like you're in horse country. And that has become a passion.
Yeah.
So I've bought the Mandarin in downtown D.C. here, which is now a Salamander. Wait till you see the final renovation on that.
Wait.
Yeah, we have a hotel in Charleston. It is beautiful. I mean, I'm now with Aspen Institute, Aspen Meadows. I'm renovated that place, so you all need to come back to Aspen for the Ideas Festival. And these are just change. I just love creating, and I love making changes for the better.
Well, one big change, and we're almost out of time, but we've got to talk about your purchase of the Mystics. And what that did.
Kojo can help me with that.
What that did to Bob Johnson.
Kojo, I think I kind of put it in the book, didn't I? Yes.
Yeah, you sure did.
So what had happened, dear Abe Poland, when he was alive, it's called Never Burn Your Bridges, okay? I've always been close to Irene and Abe.
Me too.
Wonderful people.
Yeah.
And at the time, my ex wanted to buy, which was then the Bullets. And I found out even more in this past weekend that people were giving me, apparently he went, it's a long story. Anyway, he wanted to buy them. And he got turned down by Abe.
Abe just said no.
He just said no.
No.
And,
but he then, Abe, came to you.
Yes, but before it even gets more intriguing, remember Bob was pushing Marion Barry to make Abe pay for that arena.
Right.
And this became a huge fight. But in the meantime, it's something that Irene was putting on, and Susan O'Malley came to me and says, Abe Poland would like to meet with you next Tuesday at 2 o'clock in his office. And so I said, for what? I thought he was going to ask me to chair something.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got in there, and before I could even sit down, he says, I want you to be the face of the Washington Mystics. I said, what do you mean be the face of? He said, I want you to buy the team. And I said, well, I know the WNBA does not make money. He says, I know, but think about it. And I thought about it for 1 second. I said, I, as a woman, am being given an opportunity of a lifetime. At the time, there were no women owners of any teams. Right. So I said, give me the financials. He says, this is highly confidential. And he says, I need your answer soon. So I get in the car, and I call my lawyer again, and it was Sandy Yane, and I said, Sandy, I've just been offered a basketball team. And he goes, Sheila, do not buy a basketball team.
Right.
I said, if you were given this opportunity, what would you do? And he was silent. And I said, you just answered my question.
Right.
See, because men will make those leaps in their life where women are afraid to take those giant steps that can make a difference. Mm-hmm. So I also knew that Ted Leonsis had already bought the caps, and he had first right of refusal on Wizards. So then I called Ted once I got to my lawyer's office, and I said, Ted, I would like to make you an offer you can't refuse. I said, I would like to buy into the teams, not a penny more, a penny less than any of your other partners. He says, well, some of them have not paid a whole lot, but, I said, but I want to make a real purchase into those teams. And I said, you get a woman and an African American. And Ted says, I think it's a wonderful idea. He says, let me go to the partners. They all approved it within 48 hours. And, of course, then you have to go through the approvals of the NHL and the NBA.
Cool.
But this was the opportunity of a lifetime. And to this day, I'm vice president of Monumental Sports. And when I was on Kojo's show, he says, isn't that a way of Abe sticking it to him? I'll never forget that. And I didn't want to say anything.
But
But
Kojo
yes.
said it for you.
Yeah, and to this day, Susan O'Malley and I are good friends. I've been
Lovely.
teaching down at the University of South Carolina, and that's where
Lovely.
she is in the law school. And, yeah.
I told you we could go on for another 2 hours at least. This woman, this beautiful woman, has done so much for so many and comes out
How many minutes do we have left?
like,
2?
sure,
I just want to talk about paying it forward.
okay.
My philanthropy is very important to me because I put through 50 young, brilliant students through the Kennedy School at Harvard, all from underserved communities. And they call me Mama J. I am still with these kids. This has meant more to me than anything.
Through
Now,
David
David Gergen.
gave
And
you
I
that idea.
gave me this opportunity, and these kids are so successful. They're in law firms. Some of them are at I think you're getting the high sign that we need to stop. But anyway, oh no. But I just want to tell you, I don't care how successful you've become, it's really important. And I call it the double bottom line of giving back, because you need to be there to help others. And it's not just what I did at the Kennedy School with these students, and I still see them. I run into them. There was one young man that was homeless, living in his car. Brandon Hoffman has now got one of the best investment firms
Oh, my.
out of L.A. I
Oh,
was just
my.
with him last week in L.A., and I'm so proud of him. I mean, you give them opportunities and you stay with them. Just don't write a check. You have to become involved,
Absolutely.
you know. And even up at Harvard at the Kennedy School, I had 3 wonderful African-American women that were my safety net for them. I said, if you have a bad day, you go to Sharon Fluker, you go to Patty Bellinger, you go to these people, and you sit there with them. They're there for you. And to this day, I am close to them all. They are just spectacular.
Well, so are you.
Well, thank you. And I just want to get that point across.
And I thank you
You're so welcome.
so much.
So welcome.
You are wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being with us in person and on Zoom. We've gone a little over our time, but I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.